To make sure you know you're in the right place, we're going to be talking about navigating the AI landscape, how we can make sure that we're protecting you as creators and audiences from bad actors and scams. I'm joined today by my colleague from FINRA, Mayor Patel, who's with the Financial Intelligence Unit, and also Nick Goodwin, who is an EVP at Weber Shandwick, which is a global communications consultancy, and he focuses on crisis and reputation management. So what we hope you'll take away from this conversation today is that scams are happening. AI is enabling those scams in ways that are new and faster and better than before. And there are different ways to think about that as creators, both in terms of how you might think about protecting your credibility and the trust that you build with your audiences, but also you as investors to make sure that you have the information you need to sort of spot and avoid these types of scams and ways that you can share that information with your audiences so that they can do the same. So hopefully that sounds like it will be a good conversation. We will take questions at the end, so feel free to stick around for that. One of the things as we were preparing for this conversation that I found really striking was that the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, which tracks scams that are reported to them, has seen that of the top 5 scams, 2 of the 5 are imposter scams and investment scams, and that in 2024, nearly $6 billion was lost to investment scams in the U.S. based on what was reported. Again, scam losses are often very much underreported, and so it's a big number and probably doesn't encapsulate what people have experienced. It also is not limited to your grandma, right? We hear a lot about scams, people getting phone calls saying, I'm in a foreign country, grandma, and you need me to send me money. No, most of the people who reported losing money to frauds and scams to the FTC last year were young in comparison to sort of the grandma set. So I found that to be really interesting and likely very relevant to the audiences that you are all reaching on your various channels. So Mayor, I wanted to start with you just to sort of level set. When we talk about imposter scams, what do we mean?
Yeah, happy to be here, first of all, and thanks everyone for coming. Before I answer that, I know there's been a lot of panels at the conference on AI and the benefits of AI, which are plentiful, especially in what you all are trying to do and build your communities. I think we're a little bit different here on this panel of talking about the downside of AI as it relates to how you all might encounter it. And one way to answer your question kind of directly is all of the ways that you all are using AI are the same exact ways that bad actors are using AI to take advantage of content creators like yourself and the individuals who follow you. And so when we mean impersonations, when you ask what we mean by impersonations, they can take many forms, but in its essence, you as content creators is when a bad actor is basically taking your likeness that you have put out on social media, impersonating it, and taking advantage of sometimes your followers or the general public, generally speaking. So all of the content that you are putting out there, bad actors are using in the context of impersonating you to take advantage of victims in a variety of ways, which I think we'll get into. And AI, which we'll talk about, is the way that these scams are happening is completely different and a lot quicker than what was happening 5-6 years ago in this space. And they're a lot more sophisticated. I think we'll talk a little bit about a lot of questions we get when we're talking about this topic is how sophisticated are these individuals who are falling victims to this scam. And a lot of what I say in response to that is the scams are very sophisticated, and that's something that we want to get the point across to.
Great. So Nick, why do you think content creators are such ripe targets for these types of scams?
Well, I think anyone who talks about finances has a position of authority, and your followers are potentially looking to you for investment advice, where they're going to put their savings, what they're going to do with their money in a time where a lot of them want and are looking for ways to buy the house that they can't afford and those kind of things. And that position of authority is something that gives your identities, your handles, your platforms credibility. That's something that these scammers are going to want to take advantage of. And there's also an emotional element to money. Maybe people are going to drop their skepticism because they're urgent to find the investment advice that actually gets them that extra money. And if they drop their skepticism, that's ripe territory for a scammer. But really, it's your platforms, right? Anybody with a platform is somebody who can reach somebody else for good means or for a scammer to take advantage of for whatever they might be trying to accomplish. So across the board, with the sophistication of these tools, the fact that you're talking about money, I mean, it's ripe territory for a scammer to follow and want to use you as a catalyst to be able to achieve whatever kind of nefarious end may be their goal.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that that is such a double-edged sword, right? That a lot of the engagement and the building of trust and credibility is because you're putting yourselves out there, right? And that makes it that much easier for scammers to sort of abscond with your likeness, and they don't need your password anymore. They don't need to hide behind, phone calls or such things. They can take what you put out there publicly to help other people and turn it into something that's absolutely not that. Mayor, can you walk us through sort of how that unfolds and what that actually looks like for these impersonation scams?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about two kind of specific examples that we see most often. And I would say before I start, the one thing to think about is this line of events does not impact you all directly the entire way, but it's part of a larger scheme in some instances, and initial point is the impersonation scam. So the first ones that we see and then have been reported heavily is individuals, content creators, personalities being impersonated with fraudulent or fake ads on social media platforms. The biggest out there, right? The Instagram or Facebook, where fake ads or fake profiles are created using the content of people like you in the audience or others. And in this instance, what happens is those ads, somebody clicks them and they're taken to an encrypted platform. WhatsApp mostly, but in other instances, other encrypted WhatsApp or encrypted platforms where further impersonation is happening, maybe of the same individuals that are being impersonated on Facebook and Meta and some of the other social media scams. But in the encrypted chats, it kind of takes it a step further, where they are pushing a couple things, investing in cryptocurrency, or in the context of what we see at FINRA is these market manipulation schemes, what are referred to as pump and dump schemes, if anybody's aware of it. These are larger market manipulation trading schemes, and the purpose of the scheme in the encrypted chat is to convince investors or individuals who join to purchase a stock. But at the most basic level, the other example that I'm going to give is somebody impersonates your likeness, they create a fake website or a landing page, and they direct individuals to that landing page impersonating people like you or somebody who they have taken advantage of. And those scams are usually to invest in a variety of means, but mostly it's sending money to the victims.
And some of them start as an ad on a social platform, but how many of you in this room have gotten unsolicited text messages or messages into your WhatsApp that say, I'm the assistant for so-and-so, and click on this link and join my investment club, right? Yeah, almost everybody, exactly. It's rampant, and I think a lot of us feel like I would never fall for that. This is obviously a scam. I don't know this person. I'm in a group with all these random phone numbers. Clearly, this is a phishing exercise. Can you talk a little bit about whether or not it requires someone to be less sophisticated in terms of their financial capability or their investing to sort of become a victim of one of these scams?
No, I don't think so. I think we talked a little bit when we first started. It's not that individuals and victims are not sophisticated or can't identify this, and this is bringing in the AI conversation into this. Let's say 5-6 years ago, these text messages or these chats in the encrypted WhatsApp scams, some of the red flags that we would tell investors and others would be the broken English in some of the text messages, or not full sentences, or trying to call the individual in person. These are some of the red flags that we would point to. Now, fast forward to today, what we see is the use of AI and the ability to prompt language and conversations is so easy and so effective that we can't tell investors or the public the same type of red flags to look out to, because it's perfect English. It's really good advice in some instances because they're providing advice or summaries. And then two specific instances, I think, kind of gets to the sophistication of the scams is, right, we see a lot of deep fakes of individuals' identities, or voice clone overs of individuals where, like I said, if we tell someone, maybe contact the individual via phone, we've seen instances reported and in the news where deep fakes or deep voices are used to mask the individual or use that to perpetrate the scam further. So I think that all aids to the fact of saying not everybody, or the sophistication of an investor is really difficult when the scam itself is very sophisticated.
Yeah, and this is sort of the other side of that question, Nick, which is, are you aware of stories of high-profile creators who have been impersonated, and sort of what the fallout was from that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's an example from a few years ago of a creator named Martin Lewis. He's from the UK, went by Money Saving Expert. Now he's a TV personality, but he had quite a large following, giving all sorts of advice related to money. And there was just as Mayor was describing, there was a Facebook ad that included a deepfake video of him created by the content that he was putting out on his channels, leveraging his voice, that was promoting a investment scheme featuring Elon Musk. This was pushed across Facebook as an advertisement, led somebody to a very official looking website. When they put their information in, they got a call 10 minutes later from an investment advisor named Carl, who asked them to set up a Resolute account, which is kind of like a Zelle or a Venmo or something like that, but it's a legitimate service. And over the course of a couple of days, a couple of weeks, some of the victims of this scam lost up to £75,000. And it was a huge impact. And that's a very real example of, somebody who is just out providing advice, but there's so much content of them that it's so easy to create something that is a very plausible kind of scheme to promote. And if you're somebody who's looking for a quick buck and you see Elon Musk's face there and a creator who you trust, you might be inclined to go that direction.
So we'll get to what sort of the regulators are doing to address this, but turning it to folks here, what steps can creators take to protect themselves, and or what can they be doing to understand whether or not they maybe unknowingly have been a victim of the impersonation piece of these scams?
I'll talk about those two pieces, but the first piece is, if you are, in the case of Martin Lewis, like if you become aware that you have been impersonated and there is fraudulent content, using your likeness out there that's encouraging your followers to do something that is, tantamount to fraud, you have to be very quick and communicate very quickly that, what is real and what is fake. And there are tools online. If you find the piece of content, you can go to these websites. Deepfake-detect.ai is one of them, but you want to be able to authenticate and verify what's real and show people, including the media, that this content is in fact not authentic, and articulate that. You want to get out in front of your followers very quickly. If you don't, that silence is just more opportunity for the scammers to take further action. There's very few circumstances where holding on to this information and not doing anything about it is the right path to take. The other thing you're going to need to do is to report it to any platform. Facebook, Meta, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, they all have avenues where you can you submit and notify them of fraudulent and impersonation accounts and activity. So those two immediate steps are critically important. But beyond that, notifying your followers of the actions that you're going to need to take, or the actions that you have taken, and what you're going to do, or where your content will show up. If you are somebody who regularly gives financial advice, but only on a Patreon subscription or something like that, you want to remind people that that's the only place where that advice is going to happen. If you're going to make an endorsement, or if you're not going to make an endorsement, if you would never use your likeness to make an endorsement, you have to inform your followers of that. So the more context that they have about what is a legitimate use of your platform, the easier it is going to be for them to identify the fake content and avoid those kinds of scams. In the case of Martin Lewis, I think he actually did a very good job. He actually was such a big persona that he got on the BBC to talk about these things. He actually brought some of the victims of the scam up to talk about how they were able to resolve it. He knew it was going to be a media story either way because of the size of his profile. That's not necessarily necessary, but getting in front of your followers with the accurate information and being transparent about it, like that is the best shield for this kind of action when you're thinking about what to do from a reputation perspective and how to protect your brand as a creator.
I'll add, Nick talked about reporting to the platforms itself. I think it's also important to report the activity to appropriate authorities, and we were talking before, the appropriate authority is sometimes difficult to know because there's so many different reporting avenues. The one that we tell most people to report to of impersonations is the FBI's ic3.gov. It's a website that intakes complaints from investors or those who have been manipulated or to that extent. It's a pretty extensive database. And Sarah, you mentioned the FTC. FBI puts out statistics on IC3, and this is the same thing that they were talking about. And I'd say reporting is important. A lot of times when we tell people, it doesn't always go into a black hole. We don't know exactly what you do, but I'll give an example. If you report it in multiple places, whether it be the platforms themselves and then authorities like the IC3, or even we would say if it's involving a FINRA related conduct or investment, to report it to us. The more times you report it, the more instances that will be shared amongst regulators and entities, and the more probability that some type of action might be taken. Maybe not exactly in your instance, but for future and other instances of where we're able to track all of the activity that's going on. And truthfully, you mentioned the 6 billion. When all of impersonations are so big that the government and authorities and platforms are going to have to respond in one way, and the only way to do that is if we have data behind how big of an issue this is.
And Nick, I also have to imagine that putting the call out to your sort of audience to help you amplify the fact that you've been impersonated and send that signal to the platforms or whoever is also.
Yeah, mass reporting is critical. So in the same context of, wanting to let your platform know that this content is out there, it's not real, don't fall for it. But if you have, encouraging that sort of mass notification is a incredibly crucial step to take to ensure the best likelihood of a positive outcome and resolution.
And what are some of the tools that are available for people to even know that it's happening? Because I have to imagine that, again, we were talking about these encrypted chat conversations. Unless you've been invited to it, you have no idea who the face is there or what conversation is happening. So what, if anything, can folks do sort of proactively to monitor?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of steps you can take, but I'm going to start by saying that it's imperfect at this point, even for the biggest brands. So whether you're a small creator or a huge brand with lots of resources and budget to be able to get the most technically advanced tools, right now the scams are so sophisticated that even the best tools fall short in some instances of being able to identify everything. But starting at the bottom, everybody should have Google Alerts, everybody should have regular, cadence of being able to check the platforms that are hard to search on other tools, platforms like LinkedIn or Instagram or TikTok, that don't come up as much. You want to have a really good idea of where you as a creator and your name are showing up. And if any of it looks suspicious, you can get ahead of it before it really takes off. And moving up in terms of sophistication and slightly up in terms of budget, but it's still quite affordable. There's a platform called NewsWhip that looks at both media and online content, message boards, platforms, those kind of things, as well as major social media platforms in a number of different languages that is more sophisticated than a Google alert and can notify you about levels of engagement and potential future engagement with a specific piece of content that you're associated with. I think these tools are really helpful ways to start just having an idea of where your name and likeness is showing up, and being the best, some of the best options for quick ways to ensure that you have a sense that there's no nefarious action associated with your name at that time. But again, as I said, it's not entirely perfect. Going up the chain of sophistication and budget, some of the larger brands are using early AI-enabled monitoring tools that are looking for visuals and things of that nature. But these are really expensive tools. And depending on the type of content that's in question, they're not perfect in catching everything. So it is a game that needs to be played with many different options at once to be able to ensure you have the best idea and the best sense of getting ahead of these challenges. Other things to do, as I said, notify your followers. Make some really clear ground rules of, if you're every time you post a piece of content, just a reminder, the only place you're going to find legitimate content from me is XYZ. Put those types of things regularly and repeat them. You might have new followers, new audience members that haven't heard it before, but let people know as frequently as possible where legitimate lies with you and your channel. Educating people so that the herd has an idea of what the right thing to look for is a crucial step as well.
And obviously, there's a lot of this that's happening on social platforms. So, Mayor, are they coming to the table, and how, if at all, do regulators work directly with Meta and other?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm going to take it from only FINRA's perspective. I'm not going to speak on all regulators and their conversations with Meta. Look, I think they're aware of the situation. It's been publicly reported a lot of activity that is occurring on Meta's platforms. There are recent news about state attorneys general sending Meta letter on impersonations and scams. They're aware of it. FINRA's conduct or FINRA's conversations with Meta specifically have revolved around what I describe of the impersonations, the ads on Meta that are basically impersonating well-known individuals and content creators in some respect. And the first step was really to bring awareness to them of the specific tactics that were being used on their platform. They were aware of it, but not maybe to the extent of the way that we described exactly what was happening. And then on our end, we talked about reporting. We are sharing in our world intelligence with them of tactics that we're seeing that are being used, and in some instances, specific instances of impersonation, because what they share, and this is public also, is not only reporting to Meta. So if you are impersonated and you go on their platforms and you report, and then you report to us or the FBI or someone else, and they share that intelligence with Meta. Those are two data points that they can take, and the ability to potentially take that down. So we're also trying to share as much intelligence that we can with Meta, but it's difficult. I think other regulators are engaging them, and they're trying to figure this out also. But it's a big issue that not just one entity, I think, is going to be able to fix.
That makes a lot of sense. So staying on the topic of the AI being sophisticated for a minute, what can we share with folks about either how they can or to share with their audiences, for their audiences to be able to really be able to separate legitimate financial information from frauds or scams or just misinformation that's perpetrated by AI? I listened to the conversation with Haley Sachs yesterday, and she was saying, the number of AI avatar people that I've thought were real and sort of... So what, if anything, can people be looking out for to sort of see that it is, or what steps can they take if they think they're looking at AI content?
Yeah, it's a hard question because we were talking before about how specifically to answer this. I think the way I go about it is not how to maybe identify it in the technology, but I would ask the question, or you all to think about, what is the ad or potential AI or potential imposter, or in general, what is it asking you or individuals in the investing public to do? Are they telling, or are they asking to take you to an encrypted chat or click this link and go somewhere else? Or are they asking you to send money? I think the ask of what we see online and in some of these impersonations is where we can identify whether or not it's an impersonation, whether or not it's involving AI or not. I think initially that's an initial, step that that most people should take, is asking the question of what is it asking from us.
Anything to add?
I would say too, depending on the scale of your platform or anything like that, I would encourage you to talk to your followers about other places where they may be able to verify or gain some credibility from whatever it is that you're talking about. So if it's a news article, if it's another creator talking about the same thing, provide secondary sources, third parties, to be able to add the credibility to whatever it is that you're doing. And the more that you're encouraging your followers to verify the authenticity of what you are promoting on your channels, the more credibility that you have, and you can build authenticity and trust that way. So it's an opportunity in some ways to emphasize that kind of content. But beyond the what Mayor was talking about, I think that those are the kind of ways, like, you have to be proactive in sharing and being transparent about these kind of things and providing the guidance yourself, because you can't rely on other audiences to be as sophisticated or to think as critically about the content that you're putting out there.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add the awareness and the education, even though it sounds like it is not always useful, I think it is. I know everybody, we've been talking a lot about how to call these type of scams. And if you, for instance, look back 10 or 11 years ago and reference the Nigerian scams or the text message scams, everybody knows what that is when you say it. Here, they're using impersonation and so many different type of scams that you can't just name it and everybody in the public kind of knows what to look out for. It's a lot more complicated, and the only really way to make an effort is to educate not only yourselves but the people who are following you. And it doesn't have to be a bland kind of PSA type of stuff. Just incorporate it, like Nick was saying, into the content that you're providing. And again, I'm gonna, maybe the third, fourth time we've said this, is tell your followers and the individuals where you provide or where you talk to them. I'm pretty sure nobody is providing advice or talking to people on encrypted chats in like a group conversation. If you are, that's fine. Tell them that they're doing that. But some simple things like that, I think, are important.
I would also encourage you to think about how you use AI. And, there's unbelievable opportunities that have been well documented over the past 2 days, past several years, but also some real pitfalls. And I think if you're looking to build authenticity, when we think about deepfakes and those kind of things, or if you think about visual generative AI creating content that looks like your image yourself, I would encourage people I would never recommend a creator, creates a deepfake of themselves, even if it's going to save all sorts of time and editing and those kind of things. So I think ultimately that erodes credibility and trust and makes it harder for your followers to identify when there is a nefarious deepfake of you out there. So I would stick to thinking about the opportunities for AIs in ways that you can really leverage, opportunities like brainstorming different content, opportunities like using generative AI to create hypothetical stock charts for your videos or whatever it may be. There's so many opportunities to use it that are positive and could be community building and make your content more interactive and engaging. But be very careful with what you do, and communicate. If you're never going to make a deepfake of yourself, know that the real you is always going to be in your videos. And if you see anything that looks fishy, to call it out and report it.
So I'm going to ask you to sort of look in your crystal ball at this point. I know you answered a little bit, but when you think about sort of monitoring, people having to really understand their brand and protect that brand, right? Because the trust and the credibility is just so important in this space. Is there anything sort of on the horizon that is going to make this exponentially difficult, other than AI getting better and better and better?
I think there's things that could actually probably help, but at the current stage, they're still in their infancy of being developed. But so many brands and so many institutions and people are investing in ways to figure out what to do about this that, we're just in the earliest phases of it, but there are some promising things. So I think what we're going to start seeing is that you're going to start seeing more of this education content. I think you're going to see more sophisticated monitoring tools that become more accessible and more affordable to creators of all sizes, and you should be keeping aware of those kind of developments because they could be incredibly useful for you. I also think that you're going to start seeing a lot more digital watermarking and things like that help prevent this kind of thing from a technological perspective. It's not going to be a watermark like on a legal document, but the University of Chicago, for example, came up with this idea called Nightshade, which is effectively a digital watermark that doesn't distort the image at all to a human. But if you have an image of say it's an image of a bank, if you have a nightshade filter over it to a machine, it would look like a tennis ball. But it makes it impossible to replicate or deepfake something because it doesn't actually know what it's looking like. I think those kind of technologies, which are still super early, not very accessible, incredibly expensive, there's going to be a lot more of that combined with the AI-enabled monitoring tools and more predictive things. You're going to start seeing a lot more brands, creators look to more predictive, proactive, anticipatory security about these types of issues. So really it's going to look, when you think about brand protection in this environment, it's going to look a lot more like cybersecurity or something like that. But at the same time, the threats are going to advance just as the solutions. So it's always going to be a bit of a dynamic landscape.
And Mayor, from the regulatory perspective, what do you see in terms of sort of the best strategies for us to get ahead of this? Obviously, our jurisdiction is relatively limited, but you talked a little bit about how we're reaching out to platforms.
Yeah.
What do you see as part of the solution?
Yeah, right. FINRA is a membership organization. A lot of times, historically, we have received things that are not in our jurisdiction, basically that we don't have any authority over, and we would either refer it and just kind of stop there. What we're trying to do more of, we have a lot of data, we have a lot of intel from individuals, investors reporting to us, and we're trying to share that with anybody and anyone who wants that. So starting with Meta, talking about stuff like that, but with individuals or entities and government agencies who could actually take some effort in this. The Department of Justice, we've shared this information with. The SEC, who is our regulator, Securities and Exchange Commission, we've talked to them and shared this information. And so the initial step in my world is really sharing as much intel on the tactics and the things that are being used. And then secondarily is trying to set up mechanisms, and this goes beyond FINRA. This is going to have to be a government or state or public-private partnership, which happens a lot. Bringing in folks is the reporting aspect of it and sharing it immediately, so folks who can take action will take action. I think we're moving in those right steps, but as with a lot of these things, governmental and private is always lags behind when we're trying to respond to something, which goes back to the circular conversation, which goes back to the more reporting that people do and the more awareness that you all bring, it lights fires under people's people if this becomes a big issue, and by the data it is. So I think incremental steps is happening, but those are the kind of the two main things I think we're trying to take from a regulator perspective.
So I'll ask you this. We've talked a little bit about all the scams that are happening and people who have been impersonated. Are there success stories in being able to sort of follow the scam and get people money back?
Yeah, so there's been instances of two specific ones. We in FINRA deal a lot with imposters of our member firms and registered representatives at the broker dealers, and this is the same thing that could happen to anybody. What we talked about, an impersonation takes you to a website, and what we tried to do, or what we did, was they were using some of FINRA's websites to link in these fake websites, and so we looked at IP information of who was hitting our websites, and we saw a lot of foreign-based IP addresses that would hit our websites, and then they would be on the impersonation websites of individuals. And so we tracked that, and we referred some of that activity to the SEC and the DOJ, and there was an action that were brought against some foreign individuals who were basically perpetrating this activity. So that's, I think, been a success story. And the second, I won't go so much in depth into it, but I mentioned these impersonations on fake ads that lead to encrypted chat forms that aren't saying send me your money. They're saying use your Robinhood account to invest in this stock that's going to go to the roof. And what we have been able to do is this larger market manipulation scheme. There are illicit proceeds that are made. We can refer that to entities like the DOJ, and they were able to freeze assets, about $214 million in the US that the DOJ currently still holds, and it's public knowledge. And what they're going to do with those frozen assets is that they have put out notices to the investing public, basically saying if you've invested in this stock based off of these impersonation scams, report to us or let us know, and we will use the froze assets to return the money that you lost. And so those are success stories that I think only work because of what I think we've kind of talked about in today.
Okay. So just to reiterate some of the resources, the FBI reporting is ic3.gov. FINRA's website, finra.org/investor/insights, has a number of insight articles that talk about imposter schemes, AI-generated fraud, pump and dump, which you were just describing. So please feel free to visit us there. And then I'll spend the last 5 minutes or so if anybody has any questions, either for Mayor or Nick on this topic. Yes, and please just shout loudly because we don't have anyone in the... Go ahead.
Hi, you mentioned another resource. Was it NewsWeb for monitoring? Did I get that right?
Yeah, NewsWhip is...
NewsWhip?
NewsWhip. NewsWhip, yep. And that's a listening, analytics, and alerting tool that has products at different scales, which can be very effective for sort of keeping a track of your brand online.
And then I'm not sure if I missed a mention of this towards the beginning, but can you say, is there sort of a target demographic? Is there a profile of folks who are generally kind of falling for these schemes, or is it not so much?
So the question is whether or not there's a profile, target profile, or demographic of folks who fall for the schemes.
I think you answered a little bit of the beginning. I don't think there is. The data does not say there is a one specific group of individuals or gender or age group that fall for the impersonations in general that we're talking about. I know, Sarah, you mentioned the significant amount of young individuals who have fallen based on the statistics, and I think we point that out just to say most instances that we've gotten historically or questions about this is these are elderly individuals who are falling for these types of scams, and that's not true. Some of the data that we have specifically at FINRA on impersonation scams and scams in general, it's not even in the US geographically based, it's spread out everywhere. We do see instances of these are individual specific scams, and on Meta, and you all might have experience with this, you are able to target your ads and things like that. So we see affinity scams in the context of we have seen instances where individuals of, one example is South Asian individuals being impersonated. And when we see complaints coming in, about 65-70% of the individuals who are reporting to us are South Asian based in the United States. So we see instances of that, but it's not across the board. It's very scam specific or what's happening in there. So I think it depends on the situation.
I would also say, too, I think the increased sophistication of the scams and the increased credibility of the impersonated content has broadened the demographics of people who are susceptible of them because they're very believable.
Yeah.
So it really could impact anybody.
You didn't ask this question, but kind of flipping it the other way of who is getting impersonated, we've tried to look at that based off of our data, and this is more of my opinion than not looking at the limited data that we have, is a lot of the impersonations we see are women, public facing are women, but when they're taken to encrypted chat rooms, it's women further, or vice versa. In public, we see a lot of well-known individual or males being impersonated, and when you go to the encrypted chat, where sometimes you have that one-on-one connection, it's women that are being impersonated. Because some of these scams have, we didn't talk about this, but there's some of these have been like long cons where they build a relationship, which are relationship-based scams, and a lot of those instances are women being impersonated to scam men into relationships or relation-based scams. We didn't really talk about that, but that's been historically a significant type of also. So I think it depends on the situation also.
Yeah, go ahead.
Most of the scams almost always that we're say sort of turn on your spidey sense where you're asking Bitcoin. Do you ever use the regular banking system? Because obviously that's a sure way of like shutting that sort of scam down. And almost always asking.
So the question is, are scammers using the traditional banking and finance as opposed to only asking targets to transact in cryptocurrency?
I would say it ranges. Some of these scans are using pseudo legitimate avenues. There's sometimes they're asking somebody to Venmo them money, or sometimes they're asking for PayPal. Sometimes they're asking for things like that, which are a little bit fishy, but they're not like, they're asking for real currency, not crypto per se. And some of them do look very legitimate. Sometimes the websites themselves are set up to process transactions or set up an account. So I think it's quite a large range. While there are significant instances of crypto-specific frauds, my experience says that it's quite a range of avenues that you'd be looking for, which, going back to one of the things we were talking about, however you are setting up your accounts or advice or content or whatever it is that you're recommending, being very clear that the ways that you will do it are outlining them specifically so that people know if something veers from that context, that it's probably not legit. But I don't know.
I'd agree with that. Of course, I think in instances, if you looked at the data, crypto might be the largest, but that's not to say we don't see the other ones that, Nick, that you talked about, right? If the impersonation is good, I don't think it matters what you're asking of the person. If the victim is thinks that they are talking to the person that they think they're talking to, they might not even really not care, but really, okay, you're going to ask me for crypto, but they've built that relationship. They think that the scammer is someone else. Sometimes it doesn't matter how they're asking for the money to be sent to them. And in other instances, it's more sophisticated about the pump and dump activity. Sometimes it's not asking to send money. It's to do something else, which is part of a larger scam.
And even just to tag on to that, and even a little bit of the last question on the long con situation. One, like, when the person really believes that they're talking to Sandra Bullock in my specific instance, and there's a place where, like, are they complicit? Like, because, like, I don't know, I've tried to talk to this neighbor a lot into talking sense to him, and, like, it almost seems like a piece of mental unwellness. And then also, when does liability come in? Like, if they start to become a mule and they don't understand it, like, how do you guys view any of that?
The last question is tough. I don't think it's in our kind of the mule question, for instance, if they're that. We see that for sure, where the impersonation or the victim is just being asked to move funds. Basically, money laundering is what a mule is. For those of you who don't know, I'll take the first part of that is. We've done a lot of work. We have a FINRA foundation that does a lot of work with victim advocates, and it's a difficult question to answer of how you even stop. I think we've done research on what is the best way to stop individuals at a point of the scam, kind of the linear way that the scam is happening. But what you specifically mentioned, it's a little bit different. Those long-based, romance-based affinity scams are really hard to, and we could talk about that a lot more about how it goes into that. We had some victims who came to speak at a FINRA foundation, and these were Match.com impersonations. So they were people were being impersonated on Match.com, and these victims fall for that. And this went on for like a year, 2 years, until finally they were asked to basically send this individual their entire life savings. How to stop that or what to do with that, there are specific things that we can get into because we've done a lot of research on that, which I think just given the time, I think I'll just stop there with that. Sarah, if you want to add anything to that.
No. Yeah.
My name is Jasmine. I'm a personal finance coach with a micro following, and I've been impersonated. A whole account was established. I'm curious about what consequences are there for people that are creating content for educational purposes, and if someone were to get scammed as a result of the fake profile, are there any consequences for us? And if not, what role does FINRA take if someone were to get scammed with something that came out of my name, even though it's not my profile?
So I think there's a lot there. There's the first question of what happens. No, it's good. It's a good question, right? Which is, are you liable essentially if you've been impersonated and someone makes a decision or loses money as a result of that impersonated content?
We're not giving.
We're not lawyers. Yeah,
we're not giving any legal advice, but I think the liability is low if you can show that you are the one being impersonated. Truthfully, you might not even have to show that you're being impersonated, but I would say, personally speaking, that the liability on the person you're a victim in this instance also, right? We never really said that. We talked about your followers being victims, but people who are being impersonated are the victims. So I would say the liability is pretty low.
The one build I would have on that is how you communicate to your followers and whether or not you're very transparent, open, and early about what is going on, or the fact that there is fraud happening and that you are being impersonated and somebody's using your likeness to do something that is illegal or fraudulent. If that is too slow, not clear enough, doesn't reach them all, I do think there are consequences that are not legal, but I think you could lose trust of followers in that regard, which is going back to, very quickly debunking the misinformation and being transparent. Like, that is the best shield for you. So while there may not be legal liability, I think that managed, like, if you keep it secret, for example, I think that could really erode a lot of trust in a way that could be very consequential for a creator profile.
The second part of that question was about, like, specifically FINRA and our jurisdiction. We referenced it a little. We have no jurisdiction over any of the activity that we've talked about here, unless it's someone that's our member doing the impersonation. So we would have no jurisdiction and the ability to do anything on that. What we're trying to do here is we interact and we receive a lot of this information from the investing public, from others, because it happens a lot in the context of finance and financial regulation. And so we're taking that information and trying to get it to folks who can do something about it. But in short, we can do nothing. Anything else?
great. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.